So the Apostle Paul wrote some pretty famous words at the end of Romans chapter 11 when he said that all Israel will be saved. Now, if you follow the history of biblical interpretation or the history of theology, you know that the last 200 years have brought this verse under some serious scrutiny by many a pastor and theologian. Did Paul mean that every Jewish person would be saved in the last days via a great revival amongst the Jewish people? Or is there something else going on in this passage? In this video, I'm going to tell you the two main ways that people interpret this passage today. I'm also going to tell you the classical way that it's been interpreted for most of church history. At the end of this video, I'll tell you which of the two interpretations is the right one. And I got a hint for you, it's not the newer one. So let's start by reading the entire passage in context. This is Romans 11, verse 25, and the first part of verse 26. Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. Paul then proceeds to drop two partial quotes, one from Isaiah chapter 59 and another from Isaiah chapter 27. First of all, the context. What is the Apostle Paul talking about in this passage? This verse can be found at the end of a long discussion that he's been having with himself and the church at Rome regarding the future of the Jewish people and of their covenant relationship with God. He's essentially just gotten done comparing Israel to an olive tree. And on that olive tree can be found two types of branches. Natural branches, those are ethnic Jewish believers in Jesus, and wild olive shoots, Gentiles who have come to faith in the Jewish Messiah. Those are the branches, Paul says, that have been grafted into the tree. Now, regarding Jewish non-believers in Jesus, Paul says that those are like natural branches who have been cut off from the tree. But he's also clear that as soon as one of them, or any of them, come to faith in Jesus, they will be grafted back in to the cultivated olive tree. So that's the context of the verse in question. Israel is a tree made up of both Jewish and Gentile branches, all of whom have come under the lordship of Christ. Jewish non-believers in Jesus are natural branches that did belong to the tree, but they've been cut off. As soon as they come to faith in Jesus, God is waiting to graft them back into the tree. And by the way, Paul is clear that the reason those branches have been cut off is because of unbelief. So in other words, faith is what places you on the tree and what keeps you on the tree. So now, back to the verse in question. I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. So there are only two real options on the shelf here when it comes to rightly interpreting this passage, to discovering what did Paul actually mean when he used this phrase, and in this way, all Israel will be saved. The first one, the one that's gotten popular in the last 200 years of church history, is that all of the Jewish nation, all of the living Jewish people on earth will be saved in the last days as a result of a great revival that will take place. And this will be provoked because of their jealousy over the Gentile world. Keep in mind, Paul does talk about the Gentiles provoking the Jewish people to jealousy in this passage. In other words, the Jewish people will look at all the Christians in the world, particularly the Gentile Christians, who have found eternal life, salvation, peace, joy, shalom in Messiah Jesus, and they'll go, wow, I want me some of that. I want what those people have. And those people will be like, hey, what we have is Jesus, your Messiah. Come get some of this. Now that's the first interpretive option, although I gotta be honest, contextually, I don't think it really makes much sense. There's not a basis for it in the context of what Paul is saying. Keep in mind, from right around the time this letter was originally written, all the way up until 1948, there was no nation on planet Earth called Israel. It just didn't exist from AD 70 all the way up until it was restored in 1948, less than a century ago. But also, if you want to talk about some sort of last days revival amongst the Jewish people, that's not found anywhere in this passage. People who talk about that pull that from other places in the Bible and tend to superimpose it onto this passage right here. Now, the second interpretive option is much simpler, much more straightforward. It's that Paul is using the term Israel in verse 26 figuratively. He's using it as a way of describing those people, both Jew and Gentile alike, who have put their faith in Jesus. I'll have you know, the Bible is filled to the brim with figurative language. Also, this isn't the only time that Paul does this. He also does it in Galatians 6 when he refers to the Israel of God. He's using the term there, again, in a figurative way. Now, I'll have you know that nobody hardly at all questioned this second view for almost 2,000 years of church history, all the way up until the 19th century. In other words, for most of church history, almost everybody read this passage and thought that Paul was referring to Israel in verse 26 figuratively. But in the 19th century, this idea was more or less invented that Paul could be talking about a last days revival amongst the Jewish people. And it was invented more or less in order to fit with the dispensational scheme, the dispensational way of interpreting the Bible. But what settles it for me, what makes the second interpretive option much more likely, is the way Paul starts this discussion on Israel and the church all the way back at the beginning of Romans chapter 9. And this is what he says: "For not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his offspring. But, as it is written, through Isaac shall your offspring be named." This means that it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of promise are counted as offspring. The greater context of this passage really, in my opinion, makes it super clear. Paul is using an illustration of Isaac and Ishmael to prove a greater point. It's not about being ethnically related to somebody. That's not what keeps you in covenant with God. What puts you and keeps you in covenant with God is being a child of promise, i.e., a person of faith. Not just any faith, faith in Jesus. What did Jesus say? He said, "If you know me, you know my Father. If you don't know me, you don't know my Father." The man or woman who has the Son, S-O-N, has life. The one who does not have the Son does not have life. Boom. It really is that simple. So, what did Paul mean when he used the phrase, "and in this way, all Israel will be saved"? He means that every single person, man or woman, Jew or Gentile, doesn't matter who, every person who comes under the lordship of Christ, according to God, is now a part of Israel. And it is those people, every single one of them, who will be saved.